Well, hi, Corey.
Hi, guys. Welcome.
Guess what this part's called?
Welcome to Wednesday Night Lights this week. Sorry that we're not live. This is going to be a pre-recorded show. But that's okay, because it's only different if you're on Twitch. If you're visiting us on YouTube or on Spotify, it's the same show.
It's the same show. Because that's recorded
new.
also. So
Surprise. That's our secret, though. What? All right.
But the good news is we get to do it together.
Welcome
So that
to
is
Rough
so
for You
cool.
to the studio. We're
It's
so glad
a rough day.
It's going to be a rough day.
It's a rough day.
Well, it could be.
Here we are at the dog pile, getting ready to do our show. I'm so excited. What I'm most excited about is that we get to do it together. So that's awesome.
I'm very excited.
Okay, so what do I always like to start the dog pile off with?
Well, I don't know about the dog pile, but I do know that we like to start stream off specifically with this day in history.
This day in history. Well, we've been starting the dog pile with it.
Oh,
I've been
we?
saving it. Yes,
Okay.
I've been saving it. So we'll start. We're going to go into the future 2 days because today's not September 20th. But on September 20th, when the dog pile is airing, on September 20th, 1933, the Pittsburgh Pirates became...
Never heard of them.
Well, I've heard of the baseball team called the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh, okay.
But the Pittsburgh Pirates...
Wait a second. This isn't baseball.
It's not baseball.
I know.
But it's a weird transition because the Pittsburgh Pirates on this day played their first game as...
The Pittsburgh Steelers.
How about that? Let's see. History. Who said history couldn't be fun? Okay, so today on the dog pile, we're going to talk about the structure of the NFL. How are the teams lined up? What makes all this work? How do the teams determine who's in the playoffs and whatnot? So Corey's going to switch over to that image that I had. It's on the, right there. Can you put that up on our? Can you display that to our Twitterverse? Okay. So in the structure of the NFL, you have on one side here the AFC, that stands for the American Football Conference, and then on the other side you have the NFC, the National Football Conference. Now, why the two conferences? Well, back in the 70s, prior to the 70s, there was a pretty successful football league that was competing with the NFL called the American Football League, and they were competing with the NFL, the National Football League. And they were getting lots of good players in the draft and kind of diluting the player pool in the NFL. So they got together and decided that they were going to merge. So those two leagues merged together. You'll sometimes hear it as the merger, or you'll hear a stat that say, we haven't had a performance like that since the merger. That's what they're talking about. So most of the teams of the AFC were part of the original AFL, and they came in the 70s and formed this the National Football League. Okay, so that's the conferences. There's two of them. Underneath each conference are 4 divisions. All right, so we have the North, the South, the Central. Used to be the Central. Now they call it it's North, South, East, and West. Used to be a Central Division. I don't know whatever happened to the Central Division. But anyway, it's gone. So North, South, East, and West. And that's true in both conferences. There are 4 teams in each division. So the reason why this is important is because as we start to talk about the playoffs, how do you get into the playoffs? Well, the easiest way, or the best way, the surest way, is to win your division. So if you are the best team in your own division, you get an automatic berth to the playoffs.
Correct.
That's correct.
That's how it turns out. Being number 1 is how you win.
That's true, and you're guaranteed one of the top 4 seeds, and that's pretty cool.
And that gets scary too, especially if you've lost a game or some other games that might make it hard to clinch another spot if you didn't win.
That's right. But the good news is that there are other teams that get to go to the playoffs. Do you know what they call those teams?
We'll get there.
Well, that's
wild cards. Yes.
The wild cards. So the wild cards then are 3 teams from each conference that have the next 3 best records outside of the division winners. So you've got 4 division winners and 3 wild cards that go into the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So that's how that works, and that's why divisions are important. And we're going to talk a little bit more about divisions when we're talking about scheduling, because the divisions play a big role in the scheduling. So as I said, each of the 4 division winners gets in, and then they have the 3 wild cards. Now, there could be some ties in there, like two teams are both 10-6 or whatever, and that could either be for the division championship or the wild card. So they have to have a number of tiebreakers to determine who's in and who's out. So the first tiebreaker is head-to-head competition. If the two teams played each other, or if they're in a division, then we'll play each other twice. If I've beaten you, then that's the first tiebreaker. I get in because I beat you. The next one is how you did in your own conference. So most in the divisions, they have very similar schedules, and you'll see why that is. So the next tiebreaker is how did you do within your own conference? And then the next one after that is how you did in all games. So as far as games that were played against common competition. So anyway, there's a whole long list of tiebreakers, but they exist and they become important late in the season when you got two teams that have the same record and why it matters. All right, so let's talk a little bit about scheduling and how do they determine who's going to play who, because you may have noticed that every year the schedule is not the same, and that makes it fun and interesting.
Well, in some years you play a team that it seems like you've never played before.
That's true.
I mean, all of a sudden, the Broncos are playing the Cowboys, and
or the Commanders, or
the
whoever.
Commanders. Yeah.
We don't really want to talk about that too much today, but we're smarting a little. That's because the NFL rotates through the various divisions on who you play, so that you're always sure to play every other team in the NFL at least once every 3 years, and at home at least once every 6 years. So as a fan, you are guaranteed to see every team play at home at least once every 6 years. So that's pretty cool. So how do they do that? Well, the first thing is that what's set in stone is you play every team in your own division twice. Once at their house, once at your house. Mm-hmm. So that's immediately part of the whole schedule. That's always set in stone. You're always going to have your division games every year. Then you'll play, on a rotating basis, another full division in your own conference. So this year, I think the Broncos are playing the AFC East. So everybody in our division is going to play everybody in the AFC East.
To clarify, the Broncos are currently in the AFC West.
No, but we're playing the East. Oh, right, you're right. We're in the West, and we're playing the East. Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Thank you. I assumed, and you know what happens when you assume, and everybody knew what I was talking about, and I was wrong. Okay.
So AFC West is going to play all of the AFC East.
Right.
And so they have to play within themselves. So there's 3 games. So they have to do those twice. So
they're not going to play them twice. We're going to play.
In the AFC West.
Right.
Inside of our own conference, we have to play everyone
twice.
So the first 6 games go to your own, division.
Your own division, right.
Your own division. And then you, inside of your own conference, then you play another whole
division.
Okay.
Everybody in our division will play everybody in the other division.
But only once.
Okay. So we'll have 2 of those games at home and 2 of those on the road. And the next time in the rotation of the schedule, 3 years from now, that will flip.
Yeah.
So the teams that we had at home will go to the road, and then vice versa. That's how we get everybody to play at your own house. We also play every team from a division in the other conference.
What other conference?
The National Football League. The Broncos are in the AFC. And so if you're in the AFC, then you're going to play every team in a division in the NFC as well. And that will rotate through all the divisions every year.
So you play one from the AFC, one from the NFC.
Correct.
And that's everybody? Is that all of them?
All the teams in our division, or any given division, will play all of the teams in every other division.
All right.
So you're probably starting to realize that, wait a minute, all the teams in the AFC, let's stick with the AFC West, because that's what the Broncos are it's most familiar with. So you got the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Chargers are all going to play each other twice every year. Mm-hmm. Okay? All 4 of those teams are going to play another division in our own conference. All 4 of us are going to play those same games. And then in the other conference, in this case the NFC, we're going to play all of those teams. So right off the bat, the vast majority of our schedule is identical.
True.
So you get a real good feel of who's the best in the division because you're all playing the same teams with the same competition.
Well, you've played a lot in a year. By the end of the season, you know the teams in your division well.
Right. You really do.
And everyone else in the division also knows exactly where you stand. There's no hiding.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the only difference is that some of us get them at home and some of us have them on the road. And like I said, 3 years from now, that'll flip.
Yeah, some of us, had Aaron Rodgers on the team for 14 seconds.
For 14 seconds.
That's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's how that works. But that's not all of the games yet. All right, so let's go back to the AFC West again. Like I said, this year the AFC West is playing the AFC East. And what about the AFC North and the AFC South? What about those divisions?
They'll be playing each other.
They'll have their own similar type of scheduling arrangement. However, we will play each one team from the other two divisions, and that's based on how they finished relative to us last year. So, for instance, last year the Broncos finished last in their division, so they will play the last place finisher in the other two divisions. That's the other two games. And that also happens to be the only two games, at least that we've talked about so far, that are different from the rest of the AFC West. So the Chiefs last year won the AFC West, and will have to play the first place team from the AFC North and the first place team from the AFC South, and we will play the last place team from those two divisions. And then I think the Chargers came in second, so they'll play the second place teams. The Raiders were third, they'll play the third place teams. So that takes us now through 16 of the 17 teams.
Okay.
So starting last year, I think it was, we added a 17th game to the schedule. That was part of the collective bargaining agreement that we'll talk about in a second, to add another game to the season. It used to be 16 games. In fact, originally in the NFL, it was only 14 games. So we've added several games over the years. In exchange for that, we agreed to give up one of the preseason games. Instead of 4, now there's only 3 in exchange for that 17th game.
Well, I bet the NFL liked that a lot. They're making a lot more money on a professional game than they were that preseason game.
That's right. But you know what? The season ticket holders really get screwed because they have to buy a season ticket to the preseason games. It's part of the package. You have no choice. So NFL makes just as much money from a preseason game as they do a regular season game from ticket sales. They may not, the viewership and the commercial rights might not be as good.
Well, and that would only be on a stadium that's sold out of there.
Probably not, but the season ticket holder paid for all the seats.
But I meant this: they would have to have enough season ticket holders to fill the stadium for them to make the same ticket revenue.
True, exactly. Yeah, I know.
There's not every stadium's filled.
Yeah, look at the stadium for a preseason game.
I mean, some stadiums you're on a 25-year wait list trying to get season tickets, and
long time.
Some you could just sign up tomorrow.
Yeah, and not every seat is a season ticket seat either. They got to save some seats for visiting team, family.
I was going to say, is it a percent based on the size of the stadium?
You know, I don't know what portion of their seats they have to make available to the other team, but it's fairly substantial.
All right.
Okay. So we haven't talked about the 17th game yet.
What is this lucky 17?
Game is against, again, on a rotating basis, against a team from the other conference that's not from the division that you're playing that year anyway. Right, so this year we're playing the NFC East, and so from either the North, the South, or the West, we will get a team, and it will be a team that finished last in their division because we were last in our division, and then that rotates through over the years and whatnot. But it's always a non-conference game, what they call a non-conference game. They're not in your conference.
So as the NFL's going and or the seasons are going and you're having a great season and you have this amazing quarterback and it's his last year and he goes to the Super Bowl and you win, which is great. Mm-hmm. You've got a very difficult uphill battle the next year when you have to beat every other division leader. And there could be some huge changes to your team. I mean, if you lose a main starter or a couple main starters, I mean, that could take a long time to recover from.
Well, and last year's finish is not necessarily indicative of how they're going to finish this year.
True.
Right? So just because you have to play the first place team from last year, maybe their quarterback retired or had a 13-second season or whatever. So it's not perfect, but it's just the way it's structured. And the reason why it's structured like that is because the NFL is always trying to create what they call parity, and that is they want all the teams, at the beginning of the year, everybody wants to have hope that they're going to win the Super Bowl. And so they do all sorts of things to try to make the teams as evenly matched as possible. So making one team's schedule a little harder, a better team schedule a little harder by playing first place, what they call a first place schedule, versus a last place team. And even the draft. The draft is structured to make the bottom teams better because they get to pick first. We'll talk a little bit about the draft here in just a second. So that is the full slate of games.
It's all 17. That's a whole season.
Yep, 6 against your own division guys, 4 against another division in your conference, 4 against another division in the other conference. The two teams in your relative position in the current conference and 1 from the other. And that adds up to 17.
All right.
So that's the schedule. Well, that's kind of the schedule. Now, all we really know at this point is that we know who we're going to play. In fact, we know who we're going to play, except for those other 3, years in advance, because it's on a rotating schedule. We know what it is, but we don't know when. That's the next part of this, is coming up with the actual schedules. When are we going to play the Commanders? When are we going to play whoever, or the division? All the games, they're not scheduled yet. And that's where it gets really, really tough. It's very complicated. So the NFL has this super cray computer in the back room somewhere, and they run through iterations with these basic rules of who's playing who. But now I got to figure out when. When are they going to play each other? And there are so many complications.
There's lots, and there's some big, easy ones that we can talk about. Simple things, such as the arena or stadium that the sport is being watched in. There could be concerts, there could be whatever.
The local baseball team makes the playoffs.
Maybe, yeah. What was it Oakland that had that huge...
God, Oakland Stadium was awful. And baseball and football played
and they had a really
one.
hard time. I think that the Raiders went to the playoffs one year, and the A's were doing something, and they just had the worst scheduling.
Well, the biggest problem was they couldn't put sod on the infield. So when they were playing a game, they were, half on dirt and half on grass, and it was just awful.
Awful, anyways.
So
they don't have a football team anymore.
Yeah, that's what happens when you do stuff like that. So there's that. So there's a few other things. Your stadium may not be available. That's good.
Timing.
They try to schedule it so that you don't have more than 3 home games in a row or road games in a row, because that can create.
Well, that would suck. It'd be great to be at home for a month.
Awesome. But now you're going to be on the road for a long time, too.
Yeah, so that's not fun, especially when it's okay, so it's not like on Monday they pack their bags and go to the new city and stay there and practice for the week until their Sunday game comes. They don't.
Yeah, they fly out on Saturday and practice at home all week. So they got to fly out and then come home and practice. And now sometimes they'll schedule it, and that's part of the scheduling process, to limit cross-country traveling. So if you're going to have 2 games against an East Coast team, they may try to schedule those in back-to-back weeks so that you could, if you want, and teams are pretty good about providing facilities for practice if you're going to be out there the whole week, and maybe they don't fly all the way home. Probably not as big a deal for a team that's in the middle of the country.
Well, I'm sure when the Niners go play the Commanders, it's not a big deal, right? They're only a couple hours away. But when the Niners
are playing the Commanders, they got to go all the way across the country to Washington D.C.
Oh, why was I thinking they were from Washington State?
No, that's the Seahawks.
Thank you. So when the Niners are playing the Seahawks, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, not a big deal.
Yeah, they wake up on whatever. They might take
an hour flight.
They might even shower late, right? Because
Yeah.
they've got a little extra time.
Right.
But if you're playing the Commanders,
yes,
you don't have as much time.
In the other Washington.
Yeah, now you're going to other Washington, and that sucks. Especially, the thing that's killing me is the jet lag that really messes up with some people. I couldn't imagine playing the Monday night game in Florida. If you woke up in San Francisco,
right?
Your game's starting at your midnight.
Yeah, and that was always something that we hated as the teams out west generally start their games in the afternoon. They're the afternoon games, and then the teams out east play in the morning because they're the time difference. Well, you have a West Coast team traveling to an East Coast team. They're going to get that morning game. And it's just brutal. It's just not when they're used to playing football.
Right now they're, oh boy, so they're 3 hours early.
So 3 hours early, and the kickoff is 3 hours earlier.
Yeah, so 9, 8,
well,
7.
1 their time. No, 1 their time.
Oh, 1 their time. But it still feels like 10 a.m.
Yeah, they're
right?
not used to playing at 10.
I guess they are, though, because that is when the kickoff is.
Well,
I'm saying if they're playing a morning game.
Yeah. Well,
away.
And see, that's the weird thing about the East Coast teams is they don't even have morning games. Their Sunday starts at 1 in the afternoon.
Oh, they don't have any.
No, because that 1 o'clock Eastern time is 10 o'clock West Eastern.
Oh, duh, because otherwise
Pacific
it would be 10 here. So, okay, well,
right.
still.
But they're playing like at 10 in the morning, but with jet lag and everything else, like you were saying. So they tried to limit that cross-country travel as much as they can.
Another game we didn't think about or talk about yet is the London game.
The London game. So now the NFL has all these international games, and they could be in London. We had one in Germany last year, Mexico City, which isn't too bad. I was going to say,
technically we had Mexico City, but I don't think we'll be back.
Yeah, not too bad. Well, God, that stadium is huge. Seats like 120,000 people, and it was packed. So.
Wow. That'd be cool, though. I mean, It makes more sense for an Americanized sport to branch out into Canada and Mexico than it would into London. I mean, granted, there's obviously not a language barrier there, which helps a little bit, but
well, the NFL would love to have a London
physically far away from their fan base.
Well, think about saying the Seahawks have to play in London. My God.
Which way do they fly?
Probably over the North Pole, I would guess. I don't know.
They go the other way. They come over Japan.
Ways. But when Jacksonville plays in London, it's not so bad. It's a 4-hour flight. Hell, it's probably closer than flying to Seattle.
It could be. They probably like playing in London more than they like playing in LA.
Probably. Well, and because they've played a lot in London, they've got a fair amount of fans there. It's weird, Jacksonville is probably more popular in London than they are in Jacksonville. Probably not true.
They'll be the London Jaguars in no time.
There's a lot more Jaguar fans now that they have Trevor Lawrence. But anyway, so you got that. And then here's another thing, too. Talk about jet lag going all the way to Europe. So another thing they have to bake into this schedule is the bye weeks. So every team gets 1 week off. And it's no earlier than week 4 and no later than week 9. So you got to kind of pack in. Is it week 9? Maybe it's a little later than that. Could be 10 or 11, something. But there's, you're not going to have a bye in week 17. That wouldn't be very fair. So there's in the middle of the season, there's several weeks in a row that are the bye weeks, and multiple teams will be off at any given time. And so what they really tried to do is if a team has to play internationally, that the following week is their bye.
Okay.
So that they, have a little time. Now, another advantage of the bye week is you have more time to prepare. You have more time to get your players healthy. You have more time to game plan against the opposing team. So they also make it so that you don't wind up playing a whole bunch of teams in a row that are just coming off bye.
A bunch of well-rested teams, and you're just
and you're out there. You even had your bye.
And
you're
maybe
you're ready to die.
You might not even have your bye. You could be the last bye week, and then all you've done is just get your ass handed to you by well-rested players because you've fought them every time.
Right. So they have to bake that into all these equations.
Yeah.
They also don't want there's always going to be kind of traditional, what they call marquee games. Those are games that have high TV interest. And one that always comes to mind is the Cowboys and the Giants. They've had this rivalry for a long time, and it's high ratings, and they don't want to have that game scheduled the same weekend as a bunch of other marquee games are, because then how do you get them on the Thursday night or Monday night or Sunday night football if there's other great matchups happening? And that could be a lot of times the teams that played in the Super Bowl the previous year wind up playing again because of that, first place schedule business. And so that's a marquee game. Division rivals, Pittsburgh and Baltimore, that's always a big rivalry game every year. So you don't want all of those in the same weekend, so you want to spread those out.
You also have to think about what day the game's on. You don't want to go from a Monday night into a Thursday.
You can't do that. That wouldn't be fair.
Exactly.
So if you play on Monday, you're not going to play on Thursday. So so now factor all that in and start coming up with a schedule for 32 teams.
Those are teams.
200 and some odd games, bye weeks, field availability, international travel. And so they spit out a schedule they think is going to work, and they start looking at it and they go, well, wait a minute, the Raiders have to play 4 road games in a row. They got
it's
all right,
the
next.
least of their concern by the time that obviously they didn't start with an algorithm on the first scheduling when they were trying to figure it out. You know, it's probably like 4 dudes in a room. Like, I got it. Got it this
got
week.
it.
And
I
then,
got it.
you know, the assistant coach is like, you should have put your glasses on before you said that.
Yeah, because they're playing on Monday Night Football and then Thursday night in L.A. or in London.
And then also that Sunday, so I'm really not sure how that happened.
Yeah, they got 3 games.
They got 3 games this week, though.
Yeah.
Don't worry, your bye week's coming.
Right. So there we go. So now we've learned a little bit about how the NFL is structured, how the schedule is determined, and then how they have to go into the supercomputer and figure out how to actually get these games scheduled and their kickoff times. And there was one I didn't mention, is the TV networks, especially NBC, ESPN, and Amazon, that have paid a boatload of money to have these standalone games, the Thursday night game, the Sunday night game, and the Monday night game. They're very expensive packages to purchase from the NFL, and they want to give them marquee matchups. Well, you might think that the Denver Raiders game is going to be a great divisional matchup late in the season, and it turns out they're both having a bad year, and they're terrible, and they don't want to carry that game. So those networks are given some flexibility with a flex schedule to swap games out that are of greater interest. Like maybe nobody cared about Jacksonville and Miami earlier in the season, but now they're like battling for the division. So they want to flex them in on a Sunday night football game because it's going to be a high interest game.
What does that mean, though? What do you mean flex them in?
Well, they notify, I think they have to do at least 4 weeks in advance. They'll notify the teams to say, we are moving you from Sunday afternoon to Monday night, or to Sunday night football. So they're flexing their schedule.
How do you I'm surprised you could even do that. I mean, what about the people that already have flights and hotels?
That's why they have to do it multiple weeks in advance.
Okay.
So
I don't even like that they can do that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense in their, like, financial business side of it,
well,
but
it's fun when you get flexed in, but it sucks when you get flexed out.
getting flexed out would hurt. I mean, just what if you've always you're gonna plan this trip with your friends, and then you find out a month before that your Sunday's now a Thursday?
No, it happens on the same. Well, I guess not in the case of Monday or Thursday. It happens on Sunday Night Football all the time.
So maybe. Does it?
I think Thursday and Monday games get a flex opportunity.
Because it would make a lot more sense.
You're right. That would be a challenge.
That would be really hard.
Oh, that's perfect. I'm off that day, and then find out that they're not playing.
And I feel like if that did happen, we would hear about it more too.
Yeah. So maybe we're clear for next week on the.
We're gonna have to look into that and see
Thursday
exactly.
and Monday games have. I think they do now.
If it makes anyone feel better, I just learned about this flex scheduling thing about 14 seconds ago. Otherwise, I would have researched this.
I didn't expect to get challenged. So, I hope to just say things like it's fact, and even if they're wrong. Okay. All right, so that's the schedule, and
it's complicated.
Boy,
there's a lot.
I tell you, if you're looking into getting into differential equations and statistics, then the NFL scheduling group is for you. All right. You wanted to talk about players and how do they even get to the NFL, right?
Are you... I didn't realize you were talking about this.
Wrong?
No, you're fine. I didn't realize you were talking about this today. I thought this was on a different.
No, this is all part of our stuff. The only one we trimmed back was the salary cap, which we're going to talk back next week.
Okay.
Just a little foreshadowing there.
Ooh, secrets.
Do you not want to talk about drafts?
No, that's fine. So we can let's talk about the draft.
Well, don't look at the paper. I'm going to ask you a quiz. What are the 2 ways that players get into the NFL? How does a player get on a team?
That's a great question. How does a player get on a team? Well, there's 2 ways.
Okay.
That's what we've established. The first way is through the NFL draft. You've probably heard of this. This is pretty popular. It's the most common way that most people get on a team. But you don't have to go to the draft to get on a team. You can also become a free agent.
Free agent? And a free agent is free to sign with any team they want, as opposed to the draft, where what?
Well, the draft is cool. When you're drafted, you get you will get guaranteed money. You get a salary. You get a contract. But the negative side of that is you are taking a mandatory 4-year contract with whoever drafts you. You don't choose where you're drafted.
That's correct.
You don't get to be like, oh, Jets are coming, can't wait, here comes my coach.
Right.
I mean, you can cross your fingers and hope that's how it works, but that's not how it works.
They own you.
Literally. Well, they own
the rights to you for the 4 years. So if you refuse to play for that team, your only options are to sit on your couch
to high
and
school.
not get paid. Yeah, go back and get your degree.
I was thinking go play football high school professionally.
Yeah, because that's popular. And the other is to demand a trade, that they trade you. But again, it's the team's choice. They get to decide what to do with the player. And that's to keep it so that if there's really popular teams out there, that all the best players want to go play for that team. And so then you wind up with disparity, right? You've got certain popular teams that everybody wants to play for, and they win the Super Bowl every year, and that's no fun. That's kind of like college ball. You can go to any college you want, and then you wind up with super teams. You know, everybody wants to play for Alabama, and they wind up being, top ranked, and now Georgia and some of the other schools that get all the best players, and it's hard to crack that. So the draft rounds.
So we talked a couple weeks ago about who the draft picks were, but we didn't talk about what the draft is. So we're gonna dive into the draft just a little bit today. Okay. It's typically for mostly college. You have to go to college to get into the draft. You have to use up all of your college eligibility. You have to, I don't know what I was going to say. And you have to be 3 years outside of high school. It's not a hard list, and if you didn't qualify for those, you can just apply.
Yeah.
You actually, those are the
Those are requirements. Unless you get them waived.
Last year 106 people got into the draft that weren't technically eligible without permission. So pretty much anybody can go. Pretty much. Right. As long as you do a few simple things. But
So eligibility, what does college eligibility mean? What that means is that a player can play for a college for 4 years. They can play a fifth year if they don't play in the first year as a freshman. So they'll wear, that's called a redshirt freshman. And that year doesn't count on their eligibility because they're probably not going to play anyway because they're freshmen. Some freshmen play, and they're really good, and they just don't redshirt. So that first year, their freshman year, counts as a year of eligibility. So 4 years of eligibility, no more than 5. You can't play in colleges until you're 40. And then you are eligible to go to the draft. Mm-hmm. Unless you just want to go to the draft.
Well, yeah, so I think it's really funny. I mean, they're like, all right, you have to do these things, but if you don't qualify for these things, here's your application.
You can just apply.
Just apply
here. You can declare your eligibility.
Declare it.
I'm going to go to the NFL. Now, why would a player in his junior year of college want to go play for the NFL now rather than playing out his senior year and maybe being even better?
Well, there's 2 reasons. Okay. I would say. I guess I would say one reason: money. If you're a junior in college, you probably don't have a lot of money.
Right.
If you get signed in the draft, you're probably going to start making $10 million a year.
Not a year. Not as a draftee. But you'll get a contract probably for close to $10 million. For 4 years.
Yeah.
So not $10 million a year, but $10 million for the life of the contract. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's all baked in.
So last night,
it's good money.
Last night you could have been eating ramen because you're in college,
right? And
you could be filling out an application to go play for the NFL.
Right.
So you might fill that out and you might go. But there's a couple things that I would say there's 2 huge problems with that. The first thing is you're leaving college a junior. The average career of an NFL player is 3 years.
3 years.
What are you going to do after 4 years? If you got to finish all 4 years. Right. If you didn't get injured, maybe it wasn't for you. Maybe you're tired. Maybe this is your father's dream. Maybe I don't know why you're in the NFL, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And if you decide to leave your junior year instead of getting that degree, that could really suck later. But maybe your degree was in art already and you weren't going to make any money as is, so it's time to go.
Coaching. I got a degree in coaching. But another biggie that is a reason why guys want to leave is the fear of injury.
Biggest thing would be it happens to the average length of an NFL player is 3 years because of injury.
Because of injuries. Or
So,
just not being good enough, but mostly because...
Get to the NFL without injuries.
Get paid.
Get that paycheck, then get hurt. But if you stay that senior year, you're worried about all these other life things that somebody may have told you that really matters later in life. But you tore your ACL, and it could have been minor, but you were out for 6 weeks.
Right.
And you missed a whole lot.
Right.
And it's your senior year. And you
got
to
one steadfast rule that you can't get out of is the 3 years out of high school. That's the one you can't say, well, I'm really good and I just graduated and I don't want to go to college. I want a waiver.
Why is that?
I think developmental, both physically and mentally, as far as, I think even basketball requires at least 1 year out of high school, but, it's a maturity thing, and it's also just the body catching up.
Do you have to graduate high school?
Well, you're not going to get into college.
It didn't.
Graduate.
Well, that's just you don't have to go to the draft, though, to get into the NFL. So if you are a free agent, you have to be 3 years out of high school.
Well, to be eligible for the draft, yes. To be eligible to play, well, I would think if they make that a rule for the draft, it's probably a rule for undrafted free agents, too.
Maybe. I'll have to look into it.
And there is so much additional research that needs to be done here.
Well, because
we got a whole next week's show planned because just following up from all the stuff we don't know.
I know. Well, but, there's a lot of things here, and it raises some questions the more that we talk about it. So I don't want to be the person who ignores the questions just so that I sound smarter, because I want to know.
Right.
So hopefully you can get into the NFL, right? So Either you've gone to college, you're going to the draft, or you are, whatever it is, you're going out on the field as a free agent and you're going to go to your tryouts and try and get selected.
Right.
Either way, you're going into the NFL. Hopefully you get it.
Well, just because you got drafted doesn't mean you're going to make the team.
That's true. A lot of players get drafted and let go and you've never heard of them.
And there's guys that are drafted the first overall pick
that you still don't know about because they were a huge flop.
A huge, what they call a bust.
Huge bust. We don't want to deal with that. But let's say you make it in. Okay. There's a lot of people who get real nervous when they're watching the draft because they're all looking for the first round draft picks. They can't wait.
Like that's all that matters.
Like it's all that matters. And the only thing that really matters, I would say, between the first and the last pick, besides skill, or position you're looking for, is really your signing bonus. Because everyone who gets drafted is relatively going to make the same amount of money.
Well, by round. Okay, so it used to be in the NFL that once the draft was over, it was time for these guys to negotiate their contracts. And it was painful. I mean, these guys always wanted more money, and then you wind up signing a first-round draft pick to more money than a guy that's been on the team for 4 years. And so the players didn't like it. The draft picks had all the leverage, especially the high draft picks had all the leverage, and it wasn't working. So they created a system now where basically the salary is baked in based on where you're picked. So if you're the first pick, you can probably, I think this year the first pick was about $35 million. So you got $35 million for 4 years. It goes up every year. And then the very last guy picked was about $2.5 million for 4 years. So you're still looking at, what's $500,000 a year to get the living shit kicked out of you. But that's good money. But it's not the mega bucks.
Not
that
yet.
If they get to the end of their rookie deal, that 4 years, and sometimes they can start to renegotiate a contract after 3. They actually can renegotiate. They'll have to have leverage to do that because they're really good. Then they can go and get a much bigger contract either from their current team, or after that 4th year, they can go out and be a free agent and get it from any team. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And we're going to talk about the salary cap very high level here in a minute and why that draft pick and that set contract is so important. All right. Boy, there is so much. You were just saying that, everybody's all excited about the first round of the draft.
They can't wait to see who's going to go first.
That's right. But I tell you, your 3rd round, 5th round, 7th round...
that no one's paying attention to anymore.
...are every bit as critical.
And it's crazy that people just stop caring. And I don't know if it's maybe just because the process of the draft is a little dry to the outside. If you don't know, especially if you're not following college, these are all brand new names to you. The draft itself takes several days. It's not
multiple days. Yeah,
it's not a quick process. So maybe people just don't get enough dopamine out of the interaction to care that much, but they should, because there's been some crazy, very famous athletes who picked very late.
Oh, very low. The NFL is littered with players that are busts that were picked in the first round and are Hall of Famers that are picked in the 6th round or 7th round. Or look at Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, we were talking about the other day. Last guy in the draft.
Looking pretty good this week.
He's a rock star. So every round matters. Every draft pick matters. So there was I can think of 2 right off the top of my head that were picked in the 6th round that are in the Hall of Fame, or if they're not now, they will be soon, is Tom Brady. I mean, everybody thinks Tom Brady must have been picked in the 1st round. Well, Tom Brady was a 6th round draft pick. Mainly because they didn't start a lot of games for Michigan. They had another quarterback. I don't know who it was, so he never really got to start that much. So he was kind of an unknown quantity. Comes out, absolute rock star. Terrell Davis played for the Broncos. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was a 6th round pick. If it wasn't for an amazing tackle in a preseason game on special teams, he never would have made the team.
Never would have been MVP.
Right.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he was a Super Bowl MVP, a regular season MVP, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So that's pretty cool. As is Tom Brady, has multiple of all those things.
But we don't have to tell you, because as it turns out, Tom Brady made it.
He got to retirement. So now he only has to wait 5 years and he can go to the Hall of Fame. So
he's on his way.
Now that he finally retired, he can finally be considered for the Hall of Fame. So if you don't get drafted...
So if you're not drafted, that's okay, because it's not the end of the world. The guarantee is gone. Once that final draft, once Mr. Irrelevant is picked, there's no more guaranteed contracts.
Baked in contract, right.
That are waiting for people to just come grab them. They're not just, there's not another organized event where they're going to hand out jobs this year. Right. That's it. The NFL already did it. But they're going to let you try one more time. And they're going to do open auditions almost. And
basically, walk-ons, kind of.
All walk-ons. And then you come and try out for the team you want as a free agent.
Yeah, it's not quite like a walk-on is in college, where you walk on, you say, hey, I'd like to play for you, and they put you through the ringer, and they see if you're good enough, and then they say, okay, you can play. In the NFL, they can pick and choose. They're called undrafted free agents, UFA, undrafted free agents, and these are guys that were eligible to be drafted, but they were not drafted. And there's always a lot more guys looking to be drafted than there are actual draft picks. 32 teams, 7 rounds, that's what, 250-something picks, and there's more than 250 guys. So the teams will go out and say, well, these guys are all free agents. They don't have to go through any order. They don't necessarily, own their rights. And they go out and say, we want you, and you to come try out for us. We like you. We like what you had. We would have drafted you, but we didn't have enough picks. So then they get to come to camp and see if they can cut it. And a lot of undrafted free agents wind up not only making the team, but going on to have spectacular careers. And some of them set trends that last for years. I can give you one example. Is there was a tight end for the Chargers. His name was Antonio Gates, undrafted free agent. Why was he undrafted? He was an amazing athlete. He played basketball. So they're like, okay, you're a basketball player. What are you doing in the NFL draft? So undrafted, Chargers bring him in. Turns out to be a Hall of Fame tight end. And it set a new trend in scouting to look at basketball players to play the tight end position, because they had skill sets that made them very good tight ends. Bigger, able to handle the ball well, catch, So Antonio Gates set a whole new arena of scouting in terms of how do you find good players.
Yeah.
There was a Bronco. Do you remember his name?
Rod Smith?
Rod Smith. He was undrafted. Don't know if he'll make the Hall of Fame, but boy, I think he set the record for the most yards by a non-drafted player receiving.
Sure he did. I mean, he tied the record for the longest kick in the NFL.
Yeah. There was a running back for the Chiefs. His name was Priest Holmes. He wasn't drafted. and wound up winning Offensive Player of the Year. Had the most rushing yards in the NFL in his rookie year, and he wasn't even drafted. So I mean, these
undrafted rookies out here setting records
and winning all the accolades. So that was pretty cool. So the draft is a big deal, and a lot of time is spent on it, but it's not over when it's over.
But it's hard to get into.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, college isn't even easy to get into, and these schools. I mean, we have a really one of our first string quarterbacks this year is. I mean, they didn't even want to take him because he was coming from an unknown college.
Yeah.
I mean, just because you're not the top. I mean, even if your school doesn't hold enough rapport, you're not even going to make it in because no one trusts the school you're coming from, even though you just spent your whole life getting there.
Right.
But, okay.
Oh, you didn't play for a good enough school. Or they probably just...
Ooh, we don't actually like players from that school. That's not... They don't actually teach football there. Not well enough to throw balls for us.
But yeah, the amount of effort that pro teams put into finding talent is unreal. It's really kind of amazing. But just to wrap up the draft is well, who gets to pick? Well, every team gets one pick in each round. So you have 32 teams for a round. So there's 32 picks in a round. And it's in the reverse order of last year's finish. So if you had the worst record last year, you get the first pick this year. And if you had the best record last year, or the Super Bowl winner, gets the last pick. Okay, and that's the same every round. It doesn't reverse order. It's just if you're the Super Bowl winner, you always pick last in each round. But wait a minute. We finished first, but we had more than one pick, or we didn't have to pick last. How did we get to pick out of order? Well, because you can trade your picks. You'll hear somebody say, "Oh, we picked up Russell Wilson for 3 first-round draft picks." Well, what that means is I'm giving the other team my first-round draft pick this year, next year, and the year after. Let's say if they're going to trade that many, that's a lot. So you just given up all your first-round picks for the next 3 years or the next 3 drafts.
And hopefully, if you're going to trade away some crazy positioning like that for potential new players, you've got a fully built team, right? You're going to go to the playoffs for the next couple years because that draft pick, yeah, it's still a first round, but it's not as important as the number 1 draft pick.
Well, you're right, because you're not just getting a player that is good at his position. You need a player that's not only good at his position, but will make up for the lack of skill you're going to be able to draft in future years. So that's a lot to carry. You're not going to give up a lot of first round picks unless this guy's special, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So that's that. So you can trade picks.
And you better be careful too, because if you give up 3 first-round draft picks so that you can take Aaron Rodgers and finish out his career, and then he blows it in the first game, you have to know what you've lost.
Yeah, there's no remedy. The NFL doesn't go, "Oh yeah, that really sucked. We're
so sorry. Here's his cap back." You don't actually have to pay him. It doesn't count.
Right. So when you're looking at the draft order, you're looking at where's my team pick? You'll see Tampa Bay is drafting 6th, and then it'll say, a little further down, it'll say Tampa Bay again, and it'll say from Miami.
That'll tell you where the pick is from.
Yeah, it'll tell you that they traded for that pick. So,
awesome.
So anyway, there are 32 picks in each round, and then there's what they call compensatory picks. You get some extra picks if your free agents move on. So you get the NFL helps you replace some of that talent. We'll talk about that later. So, like we were saying, your rookie deal, baked in stone. It is what it is. It's not nearly as good as being a free agent, but it's pretty darn good. And why does that matter? Because we're just going to talk real superficially today about the salary cap, and then we're going to do a dog pile that's more detailed.
We're going to do a little follow-up on it, just so you got, because we could sit here and talk about it for 2 hours, but that sounds a little boring to me.
Right.
So we're just going to touch on it, and then we're going to come back to it next week. So if you want to hear more about the cap, make sure to go find our video about the NFL cap.
Right. So at a very high level, I don't know if you knew this or not. Did you know that NFL players are in a union?
I did not know that.
Yeah, so they're a union, and it's called the NFLPA, NFL Players Association. And so they have collective bargaining rights. And who are they collective bargaining with?
The NFL?
The NFL and the owners, particularly the owners.
Oh, of each team.
Yeah, the owners kind of collectively are the NFL. And they hire, Roger Goodell to be their commissioner, but they're paid for by the NFL. So anyway, the players negotiate with the owners to say, salaries and a whole bunch of other things. So one of the things that they negotiated is they said, look, we're going to have to play a 17th game because the owners wanted a 17th game. That's more TV revenue. Right?
Yeah.
So the players are going, oh, God, 17 games. Well, I tell you what, we'll agree to the 17th game if you agree to give a percentage of all NFL revenue. That's tickets, TV contracts, jerseys, licensing agreements, anything that the NFL makes money on. The total revenue, 51% of that revenue has to go to the players, and 49% can go to the owners.
I also think that for a nonprofit organization, that's a little low.
Yeah, well, that's be the next collective bargaining arrangement. But, it's not cheap to run it because, part of the things that aren't in the player salaries is coaches and trainers and fields and facilities and travel and, all this stuff is not part of the salary cap. So the owners have to take on a significant amount of expense to run the league.
After they bought the team for a significant expense.
Well, yeah, and because I think, one way owners make a lot of money is through, the revenues from the league, but also through the value increase of their team. When the Broncos sold their team for $4.5 billion, they had bought it like 20 years earlier for $84 million. So $84 million to $4.5 billion's, decent appreciation, I suppose. Anyway, so the players negotiated a 51% revenue goes to player salaries. So that turns into what they call the salary cap. Again, the NFL likes parity. They don't want one team getting all the best players. So they put in a hard cap that says you can only sign players to contracts up to this cap. And this year, it's a paltry $224 million. That's all they can spend.
Sad, but still, if you think about how many players are on a team,
53.
And you only have
contract players,
right. And then you have $242 million, and you have to pay all of these guys for an entire year.
And your superstars are going to get a big chunk of that.
Well, and then
you got to fill out the rest of the team with not a whole lot of cash.
There's not a whole lot. So you really got it. We're gonna talk about why this is, because you could have some all-star athlete come in and want $230 million.
Yeah.
Well, if you only have 242, how does that work? Does the other 53 players split $11 million?
Yeah. Here's some crumbs, guys. Here you go.
Here's what's left.
Yeah, here you go. Here's what's left.
It's not quite how that happens, but it's not too far off.
It's not too far off. So they have the hard cap, and when you sign a player, especially a free agent, because free agents make the big money. This is a guy that's played through his rookie contract, and he's really good. And so the team that has rights to him is going to have first crack at trying to sign him, of course. And they're going to say, all right, we'll give you a 5-year deal for $150 million. Okay, that's a pretty good contract. And he has a choice. He's a free agent. He can be a free agent if he wants. He goes, you know what? I love playing for you. I love the owner. That's a good deal. I'll sign that deal. Or you may say, no way. I want $200 million. And the team says, no way. We're not paying that. And he goes and becomes a free agent. And then all the teams can bid on his services. Anyway, so he gets a 5-year, $200 million deal. That's $20 million a year. Well, the whole $200 million doesn't count against this year's salary cap.
Great.
Okay, thank God, because that would be the entire thing.
Yeah. Oh.
So they prorate the salary over the course of the contract.
Okay.
All right.
So if you sign for X amount of dollars over 5 years, you only have to pay a fifth of it every year out of your cap.
Well, not so much pay, because salary cap and cash are not the same thing. So you may have a signing bonus that's worth $100 million, but and they have to actually write the guy a check for $100 million, but it's for a 5-year deal. They can prorate that signing bonus and salary over the 5 years. So cash outlay is not the same as the cap number. The cap number is your contract prorated over the life of the deal. So you might think, oh, that's a great deal. we can sign a guy for $200 million. I only have to have $20 million of it count against my cap. That leaves, I still have over $200 million in cap money left. Great, so we can have a bunch of highly paid players. Well, the problem is if that player has a devastating injury, right, and maybe his career's over, or he's going to be out for a couple of years. Well, there's no relief. You don't get to just cut him and move on. You can't do that. You can, but you got to take all that remaining years of salary and hit it against this year's cap if you cut him.
Even it doesn't matter if the player's on the team or not. Once that contract is drawn, unless that contract worth is traded away from your cap.
Traded away. That's one way.
You owe that money, and you're paying that player out of your cap. So that player, whether they're there or not, but that player's position,
right,
it's gone. You've already spent that money, so you could cut him, but you have to bring someone else in, and you don't have any more money.
That's right, because like I was saying, so say there's a $100 million contract, $20 million a year for 5 years. The guy is terrible or gets hurt or whatever happens in year 3. He's got 2 years left, and you want to get rid of him. You're going to have to take those other two $20 million deals into this year's cap. So he didn't cost you $20 million this year; he cost you $60 million this year. And how do you handle all the other contracts, right? So it's really a science, and we'll talk about what dead money is and those kinds of things when we do a little bit more of a detail on the cap. So anyway, so that's the way it works. Free agents tend to get the big bucks, and remember we were saying a minute ago about the draft picks have these predetermined contracts. So the very top picks, 30, 40 million over 4 years. So that's a little less than $10 million a year. But if you have a good quarterback who's playing 4 years on a rookie deal at about $10 million a year, when he becomes a free agent, if he's still a really good quarterback, probably going to get $40 to $50 million a year against the cap. So those first 4 years, those draft picks are relatively inexpensive. Relatively inexpensive compared to free agent contracts.
Absolutely huge contracts if you can get good players under those rookie contracts.
That's why the draft is such a big deal and so high pressure. You got to have guys that can make an impact today, that I don't have to go out and hire a free agent to fill that spot because it's going to cost me a fortune to get him as a free agent, but relatively inexpensive to have him as a drafted player. So those draft picks are critical, especially to the cap. That takes us through the dog pile for today. As far as I have, was there anything that I missed or that you wanted to talk about or wanted to clarify?
No, not really. I feel like we really kind of got through it all.
Yeah, it was kind of weird doing the draft with the salary cap, but we wanted to do that because they're so closely related to each other.
And next week we're really going to dive into the salary cap. So I wanted you guys to know a little bit about it ahead of time too, because keep in mind this podcast is for everyone, not just those who've been playing football or watching football their whole lives.
Or who assumes that, guys make millions of dollars, and why doesn't somebody just hire all the best players?
Well, he made $300 million yesterday. Who cares?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, you blew out your knee. Bye for life. Right. You're set.
Yeah, but there's lots of interesting things to talk about in these salaries as far as signing bonuses or guaranteed money.
The length of these contracts that are all typically longer than the average player in the NFL.
That's right.
So when you are making a contract and starting it for someone, I mean, the likelihood, I wonder what the percent rate of completion is for contracts in the NFL.
That I sign a contract and I play out the entire
play
contract.
Out the whole thing.
Or the number of players that get a second free agent contract.
It's
true. Not only play out their first one, but now get another one.
And want to stay, yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. They're not usually very long, 4 or 5 years at most, because the teams don't want to take a huge risk that, sign a guy for a 10-year contract. I mean, Mahomes got a 10-year contract.
Did he really?
10 years.
10? At his age?
Yeah, but it was only for $500 million. So,
only?
Yeah, that was all.
Oh, thank God.
So they got him cheap. But anyway, his contract is all backloaded. And the reason why is because the salary cap tends to go up every year. So remember I was telling you it's based on 51% of league revenues. Well, league revenues go up every year. So every year the salary cap tends to increase.
So they took their most expensive player put him on this crazy contract, but put it over so much time that they're hoping that the percent will and they'll get to collect money and have more money for future players.
Right. So 5, 6, 7 years from now, when quarterbacks are signed for $80 million,
if Mahomes is out in 2 years,
they got a problem.
I mean, if Mahomes just retires from an injury, I mean, can he do that if he was to
That's a good question. If he retires, what happens?
Yeah.
Because he may get a bunch of concussions and say, I don't want to risk my health, I want to retire. What happens to the cap?
I mean, no one's holding a gun to your head saying, you have to go out there and throw that ball. I mean, you still have basic human rights. Granted, you're probably going to get sued for a lot of money. I'd be careful.
I'm going to write that down because I don't, if it's the player's choice, these caps and all this stuff is put in place to protect players. Well, the player chooses to retire. Well, he can't just take all the rest of his salary and say thank you very much because everybody retire the day after they sign their contract.
Well, and there would be a lot of room for
shenanigans.
Not shenanigans, but like corrupt.
Yeah, corruption.
And being a corruption. I mean, why wouldn't I own the Broncos. So I'm Sam Walton. I've got billions of dollars, and hey, Mahomes, you want to make $1 billion this week? Quit.
Yeah.
I'll just write you a check for cash.
Right.
And now the KC's out for 9 years because they owe a $10 million. They owe a 10-year, $500 million contract, and Mahomes is gone on vacation because he just bought an island because I paid him off.
Right. Well, first of all, a player can't break their own contract, so they would have to get traded. Or they would have to renegotiate their contract.
Stop throwing the ball, throwing it to the other guy, maybe moves a little slower. I mean, you'd have to be really careful with what you're doing there because...
Yeah, it's going to be fun talking about the cap because here you got a guy on a 5-year deal like you're talking about, and they're probably going to backload the contract, so he counts more against the cap later in the deal. So he makes less now, more later, in the hopes that the salary cap's going to go up and it's not such a high percentage. Well, we get to the 4th year. He's scheduled to make $34 million, but his knee's been screwed up. He's missed a quarter of the games. He's just not as good as we want. But you need to free up some cap space. You can go to him and say, "Will you renegotiate your contract?" And then renegotiate the contract and free up some cap space. But you didn't have to do it. But a lot of times they do.
Are there certain clauses in contracts that say if a player starts doing certain things or underperforms that they're allowed to break their contract with them?
Well, that's kind of a carrot and a stick situation, right? So usually contracts have front-loading things that are incentives to do better rather than penalties for doing worse, right? Okay. So they'll say, here's your base salary, but if you play 34% of the snaps, you get $1 million. If you become Offensive Player of the Year, you get $1 million. If you make the playoffs,
makes a lot of sense. It's a good way to go about it. You don't want to fear to rule them.
Right.
Well, if I don't catch this ball, I'm not getting paid today.
Well, which that means is that you need to leave some cap space. You can't just sign people right up to the top of your cap. You need some space to maneuver. If Mahomes gets hurt, they're going to have to go out on the free agency and find another quarterback, and it's not going to be cheap. If they have a bunch of incentive-laden contracts and they have to start paying those incentives, they better have enough cap space. They're going to have to cut somebody to make room.
And that's kind of hard too, because what if your players aren't meeting these incentives?
No, then you're.
But you get to whatever cap you don't use in that year though does roll over.
That is correct. If you don't use all your cap, it rolls into the next year.
All right, I guess that's fair. It's not like you use it or lose it situation. They're like, oh. Guess you don't need quite that much money in your cap next year. I guess we'll take some back. So we're going to show you a really cool website that tracks all of this because, man, is it complicated. These player contracts. You were talking about, well, these player contracts are, pretty well, no, they're probably about that thick, laden with stuff. And half of it is the player's agent putting stuff in that's good for the player. And the other half is stuff the team put in to protect the team in case something happens. And they seems fair. I mean, there would be so many things. I mean, when you're dealing with that amount of money,
right? But cutting a player early in his contract is devastating.
So you're fresh out of college, right?
Okay.
You're Bryce Young. You just got drafted.
Okay.
Well, maybe Bryce Young wasn't great because he was also gonna go. He also went to the draft for the NBA or whatever. But let's say Sam Howell, someone who's never been to a draft before,
okay.
First year, goes to the draft, gets handed a Bible of paperwork, and I don't know what you went to college for, but like, how are you? Do they give you money or anything for a lawyer to come look over those contracts and help you sign those?
Yes.
Or
the
do
players
you just
hire what are called agents.
So who pay? Do they?
The player pays the agent.
The players pay the agent. So before the draft, do these players have agents?
Well, that was another benefit of having these pre-structured. I'm sure they consult with attorneys, and it may be family attorneys or whatever, but the need for an agent in your rookie contract went down a lot when they came up with this structured approach, because there's not that much to negotiate.
Seems fair.
About the only thing they can really negotiate isn't the amount of the contract, but how it gets paid. They may negotiate that if I have a $30 million deal, I want $20 million of it up front as a signing bonus. For signing the contract, you're going to hand me a check for $20 million. And then the remaining 10 is just his salary over the next 4 years. So, he has to deal with a small salary. So, but when you get to free agency, that's where you need an agent out there saying, oh, no, he's worth, when he's negotiating with the team.
Well, after your rookie contract, you've made some cash. You know, you're not...
Hey, you're not destitute.
Exactly.
Unless you were an idiot.
Well, it could be. Who knows?
It happens. There's team-provided financial advisors to help these guys that, you know, a lot of them may be, you know, below poverty line when they got drafted, and now you just handed them a check for $20 million.
Well, and
there could be some problems.
There's a lot of problems that they, you know, I'd like to look at this stat, but I do know that a lot of people who win the lottery end up filing for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
No one teaches you how to spend your money. And then when you get a check with more commas than you've ever seen in your life,
you think there's no way I could even spend it? Oh, yeah.
Even in my wildest dreams.
Right. So there is definitely a way to spend it. So, and you'll have a lot of friends that you didn't realize you had that'll come crawling out of the woodwork when you sign a $20 million contract. So.
Oh, I bet. Oh, you remember that time I bought you a beer? And
yeah. Remember I helped you out that jam?
You know, my car just got stolen. It'd be really cool if you could help me out.
My grandma needs $100,000 surgery.
Or she's going to die.
Yeah, she's going to die. Well.
Bye, Grandma.
All right. Well, I can't let Grandma die. All right.
So be careful. I mean, that's kind of crazy, though. I couldn't imagine the lifestyle changes these guys go through.
Well, it's going to make for a fun dog pile when we talk about the money in the NFL, where it comes from, how it gets distributed, who makes what, and into these contracts. And oh my gosh, for every one player, there's probably 10 people that are involved in making money one way or another, whether it be a coach, an advisor, a trainer, a greenskeeper. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people.
Well, and so this is an interesting thing too, and we're going to talk about this specific scenario next week. But so John Elway was a player who was drafted, in case you didn't know. But when he was drafted, he was drafted into a cap sport when he could have played for an uncapped sport.
Yeah.
And for the highest paid team of MLB there's ever been.
Talk about a team that pays money.
I mean, it's crazy to think that somebody would walk away from an uncapped salary to come into a sport with a capped salary.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned John Elway because you know, he was kind of the exception. He was one of those guys, a lot of people don't like him because he did it, that did not want to play for the team that was going to draft him. And that's just, you don't get to decide that, because if you're drafted by X team,
that's your team.
Own you, right, for 4 years. So they own your rights. So Elway did not want to play with the Colts, Robert Irsay, I think his name was, anyway, and had told them, I will not play for you. But he had previously been drafted by the Yankees in baseball. So he had leverage to say, look, if you draft me, I'm just not going to play for you. I'm just going to go play baseball, and you'll be out a first-round draft pick. So they were trying to work out a deal to trade that first pick or call his bluff or whatever it might be, and they wound up drafting Elway, but I think during that same draft wound up trading him to the Broncos, and boy, that was fortunate for us. But yeah, there's a guy that had the leverage to say, I'm not playing for you because I'm going to play a different sport. He wouldn't have been able to play football for anybody because he was...
I mean, yeah, anybody can leave to go be, like, sure, you can go be that accountant that you were going to be before you got drafted.
Yeah, for $60,000 instead of
$35
million.
So, I mean, to have that kind of leverage is impressive enough. I mean, there's only so many athletes that have been to both drafts or have been to more than one draft.
Right.
There's only, a small percent of athletes that even go to the draft itself. I mean, every team's only taking on 7 people. I don't know.
Right.
All right. That's okay. So, we have anything else we want to talk about?
No, I think that's it. We covered a lot. That was I really enjoyed that dog pile. That was a lot of fun. We covered a lot of stuff, from how teams are structured and schedules are made and money's paid and drafts are happening.
You might not even have known about flex scheduling or the union. I mean, there could have been a lot of things here that you didn't know.
Scheduling.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for being here with us on Wednesday Night Lights. If you want to find out more information and have your pick 'em league, if you haven't created one yet, go to WednesdayNightLights.com.
Check your team's cap before you make your picks. Nah, you don't have to do
that. I have a quick question before we close.
Okay.
And this doesn't even have to be part
of
it.
For me or for
For you, yeah.
Okay, oh boy.
When you play fantasy football and you do a draft, do you also have a cap?
You can't. There are a lot of fantasy leagues that do put caps.
So you can't just because you've got good draft picks.
Right.
Doesn't mean you can be like, all right, great, this is my fantasy lineup.
They'll assign values to all the players, or at least by round, and yeah, you have to play under a cap. It's pretty cool. It's really complicated now. And then if you have a guy on your team and you want to carry him over into next year, you're going to have to pay a higher amount to keep him on your team, and that counts against your. Yeah, these guys have turned fantasy football into actually managing an NFL team. It's pretty weird.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.